What's up guys, in this video we're going to start using redux forms. So have the directory you have open for your project, and the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to go into source, and then we're going to go into reducers and then index. The first step to setting up the form is to import the reducer for it. So we're just going to do import reducer as form reducer from redux-form, and we're just going to add it to this combined reducer. Now what this is doing right here is making sure when we add things to the form, start typing in new inputs to like an import or pushing a button, that the actions are called appropriately and the UI changes. So that's what that's doing right here. It changes the state. So that's all you need to do for the reducers. The next thing, this is an optional step. We won't be needing it for this tutorial, but it's helpful to know about. If you go to components and then app, you can actually map the form to a just like this state.form. You can map the form to the props in case you ever need to use any of its attributes. In this case we won't be needing to, but if you need to get more data from this form, this is a good way to do it. Okay, so now let's actually get into making our form. So in components, we're going to create a form called simple form. This is just going to be and you know what? I'm just going to copy home so we don't have to write boilerplate. And then it's simpleform.js. So in a text editor, open up a file called simple form, and this is in our components folder, and so we're just going to call this simple form, and we'll be changing this in a little bit. I'm just going to get rid of this for now. And then our imports. The first thing we want to import is some things from redux-form. Field, redux-form, and submission error. And then some UI components from semantic UI. React. Okay. Now we're just going to go into the render function. Now in the render function, we're going to be making a form, and when we submit the form, we'll create a function. We'll create a little dummy function right now called submit. So on submit, we want to call submit, but redux form is a little funny how it works. You actually need to get a function from the props called handle submit, like this, and you call handle submit on your submit function. So we call our submit, so we're just going to pass in this dot submit, and then we also want to use this inside of submit, so we need to bind dot this. If we didn't want to use the keyword this here, we do, but if we didn't, we don't have to put the dot bind this. Okay, so that's going to be called when we submit our form. We're going to have one field, which is an input field. It's going to be getting the location. We'll call it location. The name is important of what you call your field, because you'll be using this to get errors and retrieve different data that's associated to this field. And then component, this is what it actually looks like. So this is a function we're going to have to set up. So location input, and then for now we're just going to return a div. Pass in location input, this dot, and we close off our field. And then just so it looks, there's a little spacing, I'm going to create a line break tag. This is very optional and it's just lazy because I don't want to get into CSS. And then at the bottom, I'm going to create a button that we can use to submit. I'm going to make it fluid so that it goes across the whole screen. It's going to be submit and submit. Okay, I'm going to just close off our form. Okay, so that is the bare bones of our form. Right now, it doesn't do anything when we submit it, and we need to add an input to that so it actually can get input. But it's a basic form, and to actually get this displaying on the screen, we have to do something special. We have to do export default, and then we call a function called redux-form. And then at the end here, we call simple form. And simple form, this correlates to the name of our class. So you put the whatever you name the class here, and then form. And now you want to give it a unique keyword. This will be what you use to identify which form you're talking about when you do form-related functions. So I'm just going to call it simple form. It's not that important what you call it. You just need to know it for later with different functions. For example, if you want to reset the form and clear all the fields, you would use this keyword to do that, to refer to this form. It's kind of like a tag or nickname for it. Okay, so let's fill in our location input. So location input is kind of funny. Redux form gives us a lot of information passed as parameters. It passes us a whole object of information. The first is input, second is meta, and this is a object itself with touched and air, and then some custom things which we won't be using. The only thing you really need to focus on up here is touched and air. These are really the only things you'll be using. Touched means you've typed into the form and you've submitted it before. Error tells you if there's any errors going on. So when there's an error, we'd like to show a little message. So first we want to know if there's an error. So has there been an error? And to check if there's been an error, the user has to have touched the form and error is not undefined. And if that is true, that means there's an error in our form. And when there's an error in our form, so we'll just do has error, we would like to display a message to the user telling them that there's an error. So message, there's an error message, header, error, and then the content of our message will be whatever the error is. And we'll be filling out what the different errors are when we get into redux-saga. This is our message, and that's only going to show up when we have an error. But what about when we don't have an error? We'd like to just show the input, so that's going to be an input bar. And this also we want to show red if it's an error, and we can just do that by doing this. So whenever has error is true, this input will be red. And then we're going to make it fluid, and we'll just give it a placeholder. Location, ... And then ... input ... custom. These are just things that straight from the Redux forms tutorial, you'll see these. These are just things that Redux form needs to make sure everything works and knows that this is your input. Okay, now our input bar is looking nice. The other thing we want to do is actually validate when we get an error. One error is when they put in a bad location, right? And then we send it back. That one we'll do in redux-saga. But the second error can happen when they enter nothing or they just have like a blank line. So for that, we're going to be creating a function called validate. And pass in values. What values is the value of the inputs. So for example, we will be passed a object that looks like this. And then whatever, I'll just put text. Whatever is they type in this input bar up here. Whatever they type in this input bar that we created will be passed in as into this values, and it'll be text. So what we want to do is check if it's empty. So we're going to create errors, which is an object we'll pass back and return if we find any errors. And we're going to check if the values, and you know what? We can get the location just like this. This will make it a little faster. We don't have to do values dot. We can just say location. Now you would want to use values if you have more than one form input, but right now we only have one, so we don't have to worry about that. So if location is undefined or location dot trim is empty, then errors dot location is equal to location required. And then we're just going to return errors. Okie dokie. So this is looking good. Our validate is looking nice. It checks whether our location is full or not. The only thing we have left is submit, but before we get into submit, I just want to make sure that we don't have any errors, and I want to check if our validate that we just wrote is working correctly. So in a separate tab, just run npm start to start up the server. I already have mine started in another tab, so I'm not going to do that. And then you're just going to come over to localhost and run the page. Oops. Forgot we actually need to add our form. So before we actually go and check it, we're just going to go into home and we're going to import simple form from simple form. And instead of home stuff, we're going to show simple form. Alright, let the page refresh. Now we can see our errors. Unexpected token. I'm not entirely sure. If we go back to simple form, I'm not entirely sure. It looks like you might not be able to do this type of syntax right here. I was thinking you could, but you might not be able to. So I'm just going to do values. Put values here, and then I'm going to come down here and say const location. And get that from values. And it should be happy for me. Okay. Yeah, if you guys didn't catch that, sorry, I should slow down a little bit. In simple form, I had a syntax error. I was trying to do an object right here. The object, I think that was invalid syntax. I'm not sure if there's a better way to do that. I haven't done it too much. I thought that would work, but it didn't. So another way you could do it is just have values and then expand values right here. Also, this is equivalent to just saying location is equal to values.location, for those of you that are not too familiar with the new syntax. Okay. So notice how we have no error here. Perfect. But as soon as we touch this thing, we can start typing. You notice we still don't have an error. Maybe if we do a little like submit, and then we start, and then we have it empty. Nope, we're not getting anything. We should be getting an error around here. Let's see if we can get console. Argument is not valid channel or a valid pattern. Alright. Oh, we don't have to worry about that. That's something with Saga. I wonder if that's causing a problem. So I'm just going to go into my Saga real quick. Sagas. And I'm just going to comment this out because it looks like it's having a problem. I'm just going to comment all this out. So I just went in there and commented out all the Saga stuff because it looks like there's a little bug in it. I'll fix that before you guys watch this video, so don't worry about needing to do that. And let's try out this location. Okay, so I typed that there. Good. Hit enter. And nothing still. Okay. So this is not as working as expected, so let's see why. So usually when this happens, what I like to do is I just like to put in some console log statements and see where I'm off. So if I come into simple form, so either location input is not being called or something is wrong with submit. Oh, I know why. Validate's not being called. For validate, we just made this function validate here, but we actually didn't hook it up anywhere. To actually hook it up and for it to start being run, we just pass it into our redux form. Okay, save that. Now let's give it a try. So if I just type there, good. Hit submit. Notice when I tried to submit, it gives me location required because I did that, and then when I do that, alright, now we clear it out. If I just try adding space, it still gives us that. Perfect. That's looking nice. Alright, so the last thing I want to do in this video is just get our submit button working. Now for our submit button, we're going to be passed two things, values and dispatch. Again, since we only have one, and I like to just break this out and get the location. The second parameter, and by the way, values, this is coming straight from our input right here. So whatever the user types in, it goes here. Also notice the name is location. This is matching our field, location. That's important. So in here, what we'd like to do is we would like to, when they submit a location, we want to go get the weather for them. Now to get weather, that is an API call to Yahoo. And that is, we have to make a request, and that takes time. So we cannot immediately give them an answer to whether the submission has a location that's good. So what we have to do is we have to return a promise. Promise has two parameters. We're passing in a function for that, reject, resolve and reject. And then inside of here, what we're going to do is dispatch an action to go do an API call. So what dispatch does is we're going to pass in some parameters to our object. Or we're going to create some basically properties for our object. I'm going to call this fetch weather. Is that set the type, and then I'm going to pass in location, resolve, and reject. Now what this is doing is dispatch. If you're not familiar with it, it's what Redux does is to dispatch. You can call dispatch on an object, and this goes to Redux and it allows you to then update the state using reducers. So this information is going to be sent to Redux and it can then act on this data that we're giving it. So what's going to happen is this data is going to be sent to redux-saga, and then redux-saga can make an API call based on this and tell us whether it was successful finding us the weather. If it's not, it'll throw back an error, and what we're going to do is we're going to catch it. I'm just going to catch that error, and then catch that should be wrapped in its own function. So when we get an error, we're just going to throw a new submission error, passing in error. Now when we get a submission error, when we throw this new submission error, what's going to happen is it's going to populate this error field here, and it's going to tell us you got a submission error, and it's going to say whatever we threw in our submission error, it's going to print to the content. So it's going to tell us what went wrong. Okay, so this is looking good. We have our form all done. So just to recap what we have built is we have a render function that shows the form. The form is super basic. It is one field, which is just an input. You can type text into the input, and whenever it is empty, it should validate and throw an error as long as they have submitted the button before, have submitted a location. That's what this touch does right here. Otherwise, you can just type in names, and then once you've typed in the name of the location you want to get weather for, you push enter. Our submit button will be called once the submit button is clicked or they hit enter. They're going to pass in the data from what they entered. We're going to get the location. Once we get that location, we're going to dispatch an action to our reducers, and then redux-saga, which we'll do in the next video, will create, which will actually do the API call in, which is what we're passing this data to. We're going to pass this to redux-saga, and then it's going to make the API call. So I'll see you in the next video when we set up redux-saga.